Hello everyone, welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfics. Today I'll be continuing with Yuuei Survival Guide. This will be Part 14, Chapter 14. He really should have seen this coming. He'd practically seen the cogs in the detective's head turning as soon as he figured out who Izuku was. Detective Tsukuchi was All Might's friend. They were close. The man knew of All Might's time limit. As far as he knew, very few people did. He thinks the man might even know about One for All, which is surprising considering how intent All Might was that no one finds out about the quirk. Of course, the detective would tell the pro-hero that his mentee had shown up at the station with his homeroom teacher, abandoned, after living on the streets for 3 days between classes, practically an orphan who'd been taken in by said teacher. That's not exactly the kind of thing that adults would keep a secret, even if Izuku was desperate for it to be. Still, a shard of betrayal stabs into Izuku's gut. Of course, he understands. He knows why he'd done it, why the detective had turned around and told All Might. They're friends, close friends. He'd told his friend because his friend is close with Izuku, but still, it was the detective's... No, it wasn't his right to share. It wasn't All Might's right to know. If Izuku wanted to tell All Might, he would have. Rationally, he knows it's not that much different than Shota telling Hisashi, but at the same time, his teacher had made sure Izuku had most of the say. He remembers the questioning look that his teacher had sent Izuku before passing over the note that his mother had given him. And they'd been so careful and cautious, making sure Izuku felt safe, offering for him to just talk to Aizawa-sensei, giving him a choice. He had choices. He was forced into nothing with them. He was not forced to tell anyone. He got to say who was a part of the conversation and who wasn't. And given the option, he hadn't minded his teacher sitting in as well. But he'd also been given options to decide. The detective hadn't given him any option. And now the #1 pro-hero was upset with him. Izuku follows silently behind All Might, being led first into the teacher's lounge, and then into one of those soundproof conference rooms. It's not the one that he and Aizawa-sensei had talked in, but it's basically the same. None of the teachers batted an eyelash at Izuku trailing along behind All Might, and thankfully Aizawa-sensei and Present Mic were nowhere to be seen. All Might's form fades away with tendrils of steam coming off of him when the door closes behind. Blood seeps from his mouth, but Izuku's pretty used to that now. The pro doesn't seem bothered either, just swipes at it before gesturing to the couches without a word. Izuku sits cautiously, distracting himself while digging around in his backpack. He's thankful for the bento lunch that Shota had prepared him and pressed into his hands before leaving that morning. A quiet explanation that Hisashi had actually packed dinner leftovers for him to take along. The thought made him feel soft inside, and he was excited to dig into the food for a second time. It was so good, it gave Lunch Rush a run for his money, and that was really high praise. All Might sets down his own lunch on the table, while Izuku balances his own in his lap. The pro doesn't say anything for a moment. A long moment. It's different than his conversation with Aizawa. All Might isn't waiting for Izuku to lead the conversation. He's not handing over sole control of where the conversation goes. He really doesn't know how to start it. The differences in teaching and knowledge of teenagers is blatantly obvious. Izuku decides, after another lingering second of silence where All Might doesn't know what to say, to give the man some mercy, not looking up from where he's tearing bits of his food apart with chopsticks. The detective told you, didn't he? Yeah, the pro finally speaks, voice dry and uncertain. Yeah, kid, he did, but I needed to know. He shouldn't have. Izuku can't help but mutter, hardly even aware of the fact that he'd cut the #1 hero, All Might, off. He's too focused on the stabbing feeling of betrayal fluttering in his chest. And no, you didn't. A small, petty part of him wants to tell Aizawa-sensei that the detective had told someone else about his situation, but that was a can of worms that Izuku would be stupid to open. But it probably would do more bad than good, too. Izuku's quiet for a second before he's glaring up at the pro. All Might almost shrinks in on himself when he meets Izuku's gaze. I told the detective of my situation in confidence, and he told someone else without my knowledge. That's not allowed. He shouldn't have done that, even if it was you he was telling. No, the man shakes his head guilty, wringing his fingers along together in a very un-All Might way. He probably shouldn't have, you're right. I'm sorry, my boy. He knew I was worried about you. We all were. You were different, kid. There's a pause, a second drags on. Izuku tries to formulate a response when All Might breaks the silence tersely. I did. The words were huffed out sharply by the pro. For a second, Izuku's confused, but then the guilt in All Might's expression is flickering out, replaced with a sharp sternness. Izuku doesn't have time to question it, though, as the pro-hero's mouth curls downward, eyebrows furrowing, as his eyes narrow slightly. I did need to know, my boy. No, Izuku grits out, overcome by a burst of anger. He'd never felt this angry at All Might before. The emotion twisted in his stomach like a dagger. It felt wrong being this angry at his idol. You didn't. It wasn't your concern. It had nothing to do with One for All, so it had nothing to do with you. It had everything to do with me. The pro's eyebrows furrowed, the frown deepening. I was worried, and you weren't telling me anything. You were avoiding me. You were getting sloppy in your classes, and I could see how tired you were getting. Your peers were worried, and your teachers were worried. Your grades were slipping, my boy. The flash of anger fades away to exhaustion. Izuku slumps back, slightly in his seat, eyes scanning at the pro silently. All Might drags his fingers through his hair, stressfully, gaze settling on Izuku, as his features are pinching in confusion and a bit of offense. I'm your teacher, as much as I am your mentor. I care about you. I could have helped you. Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you tell me? For a brief second, Izuku wants to snap a cry of, yeah, well, none of my other teachers who cared about me enlisted a lie detector cop to feed them personal details of a situation that they have no business being a part of. Instead, he says, I didn't want you to know. The boy goes with instead, capping the flames of anger down. Getting angry won't help anyone. Being snapping and riling up a pro-hero won't help either. He doesn't want to fight with All Might. He's not sure that he can handle it. The teen ducks his gaze, pressing a bit of eel and rice into his mouth. When he looks up again, he's surprised to see the shock on All Might's face. Izuku's not sure why the man looks that way, but it makes his heart drop into his stomach. He'd never really seen something like that on All Might's face, never so strong. The surprise is strong and present, but under that, hidden in his eyes, is uncertainty and heartbreak. What? Why? The man's voice is tight, and he seems to realize it too, because he cuts himself off. He takes a breath, blowing out slowly before trying again. Why not, my boy? Why not? Izuku cocks his head. The answer is obvious. Because you're you. And it's true. Not only does he not want to burden the #1 pro-hero with his problems, he'd never do that to begin with. His problems weren't important, not enough to seek out All Might's help. Plus, All Might is busy. All Might has the world on his shoulders already. Izuku doesn't want to add any more onto his plate. As awful as it is to think, if All Might doesn't have the time to talk about quirk stuff, to help him learn his powerful, potentially deadly quirk, why would he have time to care about Izuku's home life? And again, it's really not the pro's business. It's Izuku's. Because, besides, he hadn't even wanted to tell anyone. Frankly, if Oboro hadn't lured his homeroom teacher in with ghost voodoo or whatever he'd done, Izuku probably would have been still sleeping on the streets, struggling to survive. His eyebrow arches as All Might chokes on blood at the admission, some spurting out to his hands. He barely manages to catch the mess of red eyes staring at Izuku in a surprised, uncertain type of way. The teen fiddles with his chopsticks, frowning with himself as he continues softly. You're you, All Might. Why would I had it handled. I didn't want anyone to know. I was doing fine. You were living on the streets, the man reminds him breathily after composing himself. His voice remains low and careful, but there's an edge to it that Izuku wants to duck away from. All Might's eyes track Izuku's own clumsy chopsticks, movements, and his fists at his chin, and the way that the corners of his mouth, most of the blood wiping away. Your mother left, my boy. That sucks, Izuku fills in softly, indifferently, despite the pit of guilt and sadness in his own stomach, as he pushes rice around in his bento container. I know. But it's not the end of the world. I barely even noticed. She's been distant for weeks. Months, even. Months? The stuttered way the man breathed the word out had Izuku looking up, eyebrows knitting in confusion. All the fight, the flaring hostility that had clouded the pro's gaze, fades away to a deep look of despair. The pro looks deep in thought, and if by the way his features twist before melting into worry, it's not nice thoughts. Izuku doesn't try to speak again, not when the pro looks so wrecked by something. My boy, Toshinori asks slowly, carefully. He draws out the words uncertainly, like he's afraid to continue, or afraid of an answer. Did your mother leave because of One for All? He's not really expecting that. He doesn't know where the pro got the idea from. His mother doesn't even know about One for All. Not as far as Izuku knows, at least. She'd never asked, and he hadn't seen her to tell her he'd magically manifested a quirk on the day that he'd completed in the entrance exam. As far as she knows, from what he knows at least, he'd gotten into UA completely quirkless, because that's what he'd always been, quirkless. He's not even sure she would have stayed if he had manifested a quirk earlier. It wasn't the quirklessness that drove her away, not like it had his father. It was Izuku who chased his own mother away. His gift of seeing ghosts, the fear of her child being different, being weird. Ironically, it was the quirk he'd had all along, that no one he'd ever known that he'd even had in his body. It wasn't biologically equipped to handle any other quirks, according to Izuku's pediatrician, who quite possibly could have been a quack like Oboro had huffed weeks prior, that had chased away the ones who were supposed to love him unconditionally. Who would have thought his unique gift that he'd had since he was born was the quirk that his parents had desperately wished he'd manifest? Izuku opens his mouth after a long second, thinks about what to say, comes up short, and closes his mouth again. He does it a second time before clearing his throat and swallowing to calm the nerves. Why would you think that? The pro blinks at him, shifts where he's sitting before leaning back against the backrest of the couch. Now Masa said, "You lied about why your mother left." He didn't press it because Aizawa was there as well. No, Aizawa doesn't. That he's unaware of this, me mentoring you, and about One For All. Now Masa mentioned Aizawa was concerned that we were together after the USJ incident. He assumed that you lied because you didn't want Aizawa to know. All Might thought his mother left because he got One For All. And honestly, that's a perfect excuse. Yeah, he could say, solemnly. It was too much for her, all the power I suddenly had, having to watch me get hurt all the time. I guess it drove her away. It would be so easy. All Might had just hand-fed him the answer to his problems. He'd given him an out, made an excuse for him. It would be easy. But he can't. He can hardly bear the look the pro-hero is trying to keep neutral, the deep-seated guilt clouding his eyes at the thought that something he handed over had unintentionally orphaned a young boy. He loved All Might, he adored the man, looked up to him, and had for the majority of his life. He couldn't bet that all on him now because it just wasn't true. He refused, even if it was an easy way out. No, Izuku shakes his head lightly, picking at his food now. He's not sure how to continue. He doesn't want to tell anyone. It was still weird. It was still the reason his mother had left. Why he'd always been made fun of. His natural quirk was a secret for a reason. And if he couldn't keep his own secret, what hope did he have of keeping One For All a secret? It wasn't... No. She didn't even know about One For All. Well, I'm sorry, I don't want to... You don't have to tell me why she left then. The pro comes to his rescue, voice small. He looks like he really wants to know, wants an answer, but Izuku chooses to focus on the words instead of his bleeding face. My boy, I know this is a personal matter. I see that now, and I see now that just because I was worried for you, it gave me no right to act on it as I did, and as Naomasa did. What we did, it was unprofessional and wrong. There's a pause, but Izuku doesn't look up from his food. He'd more or less just mixed the pieces of crumbled-up eel into the rice at this point instead of eating it, but he's not even really hungry right now. Stressed. He was stressed. This was stressful. The hero draws in a slow breath before continuing. This wasn't the right way to go about my worry for you as a student, both within UA as well as regarding One For All. This was wrong. I was wrong. Naomasa telling me something so personal about you without your consent was wrong. It was an abuse of my power as the #1 hero, and an abuse of my relationship and friendship with the detective, as well as an abuse of Naomasa's position. And for that, I apologize. Izuku's gaze slowly crawls up from the bento in his lap to the pro-hero. All Might's head is bowed forward, tone genuinely apologetic and guilty. He doesn't really look like himself right now. All Might's tone dropping like this, especially not for him, but he can't lie and say it isn't nice to get an apology. It was wrong. It was probably against some laws, too, that the detective had told All Might something so personal about a minor's personal situation. He was supposed to be able to trust the police, but he didn't know if he could. It was wrong, what they'd done. He gets it, the worry that All Might must have been battling. Izuku knows that he'd been withdrawn, but he'd had a lot on his plate. It wasn't just All Might that he pushed away, it was everyone. Still, he really had abused his status as Izuku's mentor, as well as the detective abusing his position within the force. It's okay, Izuku wants to tell the pro. He wants this to be over. He wants to brush this under the rug, to be done with it. He wants so badly for this just all go away. But it's not. It wasn't okay, and he wasn't okay. It's not okay, the teen breathes out without lifting his eyes from his chopsticks. I'm upset, and I feel like you went behind my back. You had no right to do that. If I wanted you to know, I would have told you. And what happened at the police station was private. That detective had no right to tell you, friends or not. I'm angry, All Might. I am mad at you. As you should be. The pro winces, his hands interlocked together, falling into his lap like a scolded schoolboy awaiting punishment outside the principal's office. I truly am sorry, kid. We were wrong. I was wrong. I broke your trust in me, and Nomasa did as well. That was unforgivable. The deeply apologetic tone stirs up feeling in Izuku's stomach. If he wasn't hungry before, he certainly wasn't now. Deciding to stop playing with his food, the teen silently closes the bento container, sucking the ends of his chopsticks to clean the rice clinging to them before shoving them both back into his backpack. He doesn't say anything else for a long second, and neither does All Might. It's not broken, the teen mutters after a deep, exhausted sigh. He's drained. He's just so done with everything being about him, about everyone snooping in his business. The boy drops his gaze down to his backpack that's clutched in his hands. Just bent. I trust you. I just hate what you did. It wasn't cool. He's not sure anything All Might could do would completely shatter his trust in the pro. He'd looked up to him for too long. He'd adored this man for too long. All Might did too much good. Maybe he wasn't good at this, but he was good. As do I. The man shakes his head. I wasn't thinking, young Midoriya. I forgot my place in your life. You don't rely on me like I relied on my mentors. It won't happen again, that I assure you. I want to be someone that you can come to when you need help. I don't want you to have to go through this alone. I was never alone with One for All. I always had a mentor around, and friends who stuck close. It pains me to know that you were alone on the street for 3 nights. I wasn't alone. I had Sensei. The boy whispers out only after he'd said it, realizing how rude it sounds to the man attempting to be that someone for him. It was true, but it did come off as rude. He found me by some stroke of luck, and he helped me. He's the only reason that I went to the police. I owe him a lot. That didn't help much. He opens his mouth to apologize, only to freeze when All Might lets out a low laugh. It's not happy or humorous, but it's also not a sad laugh. It falls somewhere between defeated and appreciative. Izuku's eyes shoot up to meet All Might's at the sound of that breathy laughter, but the pro-hero's gaze is locked down on his untouched bento box. I suppose so. All Might's soft laugh slows, but the small smile on his face doesn't waver. Aizawa's a good one to have in your corner. I'm glad you weren't alone, kid. Even if you don't put your faith in me, put it into someone, all right? The world's a lonely place when you do everything alone. Izuku hadn't cried the whole time. He'd been close at times, talking about his mom, seeing the pro-hero succumb to guilt that wasn't entirely warranted. He'd wanted to cry, through his anger and the flurry of betrayal, but he hadn't. The words hit something deep in Izuku, though. He'd noticed he'd been miserable by himself, terrified. He's not sure if he would have done it, or how he would have survived if Oboro hadn't even led his teacher to him. Where would he be now? Just a couple of days later had Oboro not forced Izuku to take action. The tears slip down his face before he knows that they're welling. He doesn't quite hear the pro force out a breath, nor hear the man stand and round the coffee table. I'm sorry, my boy, the hero whispers. I didn't mean to. Izuku jolts up to wrap around the pro, pressing his cheek against All Might's chest. For half a second, the pro doesn't move, and then he's returning the embrace just as fiercely. It's not the first time that Izuku had hugged All Might, and, man, was that not a thought that would have probably made a 5-year-old Izuku pass out in excitement. All Might, despite the skinny frame, was a very good hugger. He wrapped tightly around Izuku, one arm pressing against his back, while the other nodded through his hair, cradling his head. Izuku made sure not to squeeze too hard around where All Might had been wounded all those years ago, but he did melt into the touch. Hugs were scarce in his life, especially hugs from adults. He manages to contain the sobs that are threatening to build up, sniffling into the man's pulling suit jacket and button-up shirt. All Might is silent above him, but his grip doesn't waver until Izuku starts to pull back. Thank you, the teenager bows his head slightly, for being worried and thinking about me. I'm okay. I appreciate everything you've done and that you're doing for me. All Might's voice comes out misty, even after clearing his throat. The pro drops down to sit on the edge of the coffee table, one hand settling on Izuku's knee, and his eyes shine with determination. Any time, my boy. You remember that. Izuku nods quickly, reaching up to palm away the lingering tears in his eyes, and clinging to his own cheeks. He hopes that he doesn't look like he'd been crying. Class was about to start again soon. You should. The man clears his throat again, an emotional undertone still clinging despite his efforts. You should probably head out soon. Your next lessons are about to start, and we both know Aizawa doesn't stand for tardiness. Yeah, Izuku sniffles, shooting the pro a tiny, honest smile. He wipes at his eyes once more, for good measure, wincing at the irritation that he was sure was bright red now, both from crying and roughly trying to dry his tears. He's still upset, rightfully so, but he feels better about the situation. The apology had helped, and even though it had taken All Might a little while to realize what he'd done was unsavory, he had come to the right conclusion in the end, and that's what really matters. Izuku wholeheartedly believes that the pro will keep his word when it comes to not overstepping. Izuku stands, pulls his backpack on as he ducks his head in a nod before moving towards the door. All Might is on his heels, carrying his own untouched lunch. The teen pulls the door open, takes exactly one step out where he freezes. The teacher's lounge is empty, well, besides one person. Said one person's eyes drift over at the opening of the door from where they're sitting at their desk. Hi, Mike-sensei. Izuku breathes out with a crooked smile. Oof. Busted. Even behind present Mike's tinted glasses, he can see the man's eyes widen a fraction in surprise, body jolting up in concern. He must look a lot more like he'd been crying than he thought he did, or maybe his face was just all red, a mixture of strong emotions and the fact that he'd cried. The voice hero's eyebrows knit together as he moves to stand, a question on his lips that dies out unexpectedly. Mike's eyes swiftly trail up Izuku and land over his shoulder. Izuku can feel the number one hero there, and the boy is sure that he winces. Not that either teacher is looking at him to notice. It's not exactly a secret that he and All Might are kind of close, but they'd never really been caught sneaking around. Well, not that they were really sneaking around, just... Ah, Yamada, All Might greets, slipping out past Izuku. He'd forgotten for a second that All Might was in his weakened form and could squeeze through. Good afternoon. All Might, present Mike greets in reply, scanning the man with a frown before his gaze shifts back to Izuku. The teen pretends the way that his teacher's expression softens doesn't make him feel soft and content, instead scuffing the toe of his sneaker against the floor and stepping more into the room. Listener, what's up? You okay? Oh, Izuku swallows. Yes, I'm fine, and, nothing. We were... Young Midori and I were just talking about some extra credit to boost his grade. All Might fills in with a cheerful smile, strutting to his desk where he deposits the bento. They slipped a little recently, and we all know that we just won't let that happen in this course. We figured it all out, right, my boy? Yep, Izuku yelps, internally wincing. Even he knew that wasn't convincing. He shakes his head to himself, before looking back up at his English teacher. It's all sorted out now. I'm feeling better. Present Mike eyes him, frown deepening before he glances over at where All Might is shifting. His gaze returns to Izuku, the confusion knitting his eyebrows together, deepening. You've been crying, listener. Yeah, a bit. Izuku gives a watery laugh, wiping his eyes once again. It's not like he can deny it. Present Mike had seen him cry before. I'm all right, though. I was just nervous. I really don't like my grades being so low. Uh-huh. The voice hero gives a slow, not entirely believing nod. Sure, of course. Glad you're getting some help, kiddo. There's a sinking feeling in his chest that this is going to get back to Aizawa. Actually, he knows this is going to make its way to its homeroom teacher. Sensei and Mike are married. Even if Mike doesn't tell Aizawa at school, he'll probably tell him at home. They don't seem like the type to keep secrets from each other. Izuku's kind of dreading Aizawa-sensei finding out about one-for-all meetings that he'd had with the number one pro hero. He's sure the man already has his suspicions, but this will only add fuel to the fire. All Might and Izuku coming out of a private meeting where Izuku had been crying? Yikes. That doesn't look too good for the number one hero, especially considering he's already not Aizawa-sensei's favorite person. Well, Izuku clears his throat very awkwardly. His teachers seem to be having a conversation with their eyes. All Might is definitely going to be taking some heat directly from this, but Izuku really doesn't want to hang around and watch. Class will be, starting soon, so he gestures to the door at his side. Right. Present Mike nods, dragging his attention from All Might and onto Izuku. He gives him a light smile, but something in his eyes tells Izuku that this probably isn't over with him either. Double yikes. You have a good rest of your day, kiddo, you dig? You too, the teen bursts out, hand pressed against the door. His fingers tense to push the door open, and he's using every ounce of self-control to not activate One for All in his antsy attempt to get out. You as well, All Might Sensei. He doesn't wait around for a response, slipping out of the door quickly. What were you doing talking extra credit without Aizawa? Izuku hears Present Mike ask as the door shuts behind him. His voice is probably the hardest that Izuku's ever heard. I was simply offering to help the boy some. I was unaware I needed to run that past Aizawa. He was crying. Mike's tone was sharp as a dagger, silencing the number one hero with ease. What the hell did you say to him to... The door shuts, cutting the conversation off from his ears. Probably for the best. Oboro was right. Present Mike was someone that you did not want to get on their bad side, and Izuku thought Aizawa-sensei could be scary. Yeesh. The next few days are hectic at best. School doesn't really change, despite the heavy gravity that the sports festival is just around the corner. Izuku sees the way that his peers are pushing themselves to get just that little bit better before being shoved under a spotlight with spectators watching and observing like they're a group of show ponies. Everyone wants to be the best, and that shows in the effort that they're putting in when it comes to their training. The festival, has the potential to open so many doors for them, so they all know that they need to be good. There will definitely be scouts, and though they're mostly for the second and third year students, it's the first real chance the first years have at getting their quirks noticed and scouted too. Izuku's no different than the rest of his classmates, using everything that he'd learned thus far. Between his hero course classes and those few personal quirk training sessions with Sensei they'd managed to have, he used them to his full advantage. He's got miles to go, but he is sure that he can get himself noticed. He is excited for the festival, just as much as he is terrified, but it's a good terrified, he thinks. Izuku wishes that he'd had more time to practice using One for All, but his time had been spread fairly thin. As much as he'd love for the upcoming sports festival to be the only thing on his mind, his new home life, this one with his teachers, has been busy. Wednesday, after school, they'd gone shopping just like Shota had promised the night prior. Izuku had thought that they were just going to get toiletries, his own shampoo and deodorant. That's all he planned to buy anyways. It was all he'd really ever needed and spent the money on. Plus, he was sure that he could afford it with what little money he had left over from his shifts at the cafe. That was not what had happened. Hisashi was the one to announce with an excited grin that they were heading to the mall when he saw Izuku at the end of the day. The teen had dutifully followed behind his homeroom sensei to the door leading to the secret underground parking garage, which was where the voice hero was waiting. Shota had frowned heavily at the news, scanning his ID card to grant them access with a sigh. Izuku's lips tugged into an uncertain frown at his teacher's reaction, mouth opening to tell him that he didn't need to go shopping, but Hisashi was quick to correct him. He hates shopping, the blonde had muttered solemnly, patting Izuku's shoulder as if sensing his unease. Too peoply for him, so don't mind his grumpy pants attitude, listener. Grumpy pants, Shota had scoffed. Clever, Hisashi. I'm so offended. Shush, the blonde pouts as the three of them got into the car. Oboro, who Izuku had wondered where he was already reclined in the back seat of the car, eyes shut, but they flickered open when Izuku settled beside him. Ha! You're in the back seat, too. Share the pain, my friend. Me? Shush, Shota huffed with a roll of his eyes. You're the one calling me names. You know I only do it out of love, Hisashi sighed happily, grinning to the right where Shota was settling into his passenger seat. My darling. Gross, Shota scoffed once more, though his cheeks tinted slightly with color, and he's turning his head to the side to stare out the window. Gross, Oboro echoed, a mixture of exasperation, fondness, and actual half-hearted disgust in his expression. Izuku almost wants to laugh at the way that the ghost's face has pinched up like the affection had physically offended him. When the ghost continues, his voice is filled with fondness, curled in a teasing way. I'm sorry you have to hear this, Izu. I wish I didn't have to hear this. Izuku doesn't say anything, but he does let a light smile grace his lips. He doesn't think it's gross. Weird, a bit, but not gross. It's actually almost cute, in a weird, these are my teachers kind of way. He feels special that this side of them he actually gets to see, that they don't mind showing him. These people aren't Present Mike and Aizawa-sensei, despite the costumes that they're wearing. These two are his new two foster parents, Shota and Hisashi. They don't change much, varying from school life and home life, but there are little things, like the affection. Hey, don't call my love gross, Hisashi playfully huffed. You're so mean, Sho, and in front of our sweet, innocent little listener, too. The nerve. Izuku actually laughs at that. Ducking his head, he thinks he feels both his teachers glance back at him, but he doesn't dare look up from where his curls have curtained his eyes. He's sure they can see his smile, though. Shota huffs tiredly, and Hisashi returns a light laugh, hand snaking over to pat Shota's knee. They stop by the apartment to change out of their uniforms. Hisashi rubs awkwardly at the back of his neck while he explains that people tend to flock when the pro is known and makes his appearance in their costumes. Thankfully, he's hardly recognizable out of costume, with his hair down and his regular framed glasses, and Shota is, well, never recognized to begin with. Izuku hadn't even been able to place him until seeing him use his quirk that first day, and none of his peers had connected the dots until after Izuku had muttered their teacher's name, and even then, some of them didn't know who Eraserhead was. Shota doesn't appear thrilled to be going shopping, even when he's dressed in black jeans and a matching black shirt, flopped on the couch where Nemo had curled up on the small of his back. But he shoots Hisashi an annoyed, offended look when the blonde-haired man offers for him to stay home and sleep while they go. Which is how Izuku finds himself, tucked under Hisashi's arm as he leads the teen along in the mall, with Shota trailing a step or so behind them, shoulders slumped and hands buried in his pockets. "Where do you like to shop, kiddo?" Hisashi had asked, glancing down at Izuku. Izuku's not sure how to say the cheapest place I can find without sounding pathetic, so he shrugs his shoulders. Izuku remains silent at his teacher's side while they bicker about where to shop. Hisashi wants to visit expensive shops where he buys his own products, but Shota demands that they not go somewhere too expensive. Shota wins in the end, when Hisashi glances down at the teenager who's tucked under his arm, clearly spotting the guilty fear on his face. He relents without a fight after that. Izuku is jarred, blatantly slow, at everything that's added to their shopping cart for him when they arrive at the department store, where the prices aren't horrific, but still not cheap quality. It's a good middle ground, I guess. He'd been expecting to grab a bottle of nice-smelling shampoo and new deodorant, but he is getting to the end of being between all the physical activity he's been doing between classes and his own training schedule. That's not what happens. They'd started at the toiletries, but it was just not soap and other necessities. One by one, his teachers directed him to pick something that he likes, and it's added to the cart without a word. He smells handfuls of shampoos and conditioners and body washes and deodorants. He actually started to get a headache from this contradicting scents. He gets a new toothbrush and dental floss, and frankly the most expensive toothpaste that he'd ever gotten in his life. Hisashi had selected that for him and tossed it in the cart before he could mutter a word. He thinks they're done after that, but instead of heading towards the checkout lanes, Hisashi turns the cart towards home goods sections. "Bed sheets," Hisashi had huffed, when Izuku blinked in confusion. "The guest room needs new bed sheets." But it's not just bed sheets. It's a couple new pillows and a comforter set that Izuku hesitantly picks out, 3 different pairs of bed sheets and pillowcases, along with a plush black and white stuffed cat that Shota glares fondly at before tossing it into the cart without a word. His only excuse when Hisashi cocks his head in entertained confusion is, "Looks like blanket," which he mutters with a shrug of his shoulders before his hands are replaced in his pockets. It does look like blanket, but that's not the point. Izuku feels bad they're spending all this money. It's a lot. He doesn't even want to know what the total's going to be. He knows that blankets and bed stuff and even toiletries are expensive, and when he tried to voice this softly but making sure they knew he was grateful for the effort, Hisashi frowned thoughtfully. "We're just sprucing up the guest room, kiddo. You're just the lucky first one to use it, you dig?" And that's totally a lie if Izuku's ever heard one. If that was true, Izuku would not be getting as much say in the colors, the textures, and the general likes and dislikes when it came to everything in the cart. Like how he'd reached out to feel the texture of a fuzzy blanket, unaware of the light smile on his face because it was so soft, only for Shota to toss it into the cart when Izuku stepped away. And once again, just when he thinks they're done, Shota is now manning the cart, starts in the direction of the clothing section. "Really?" the teen tries in vain to deter them. I don't need anything. I have clothes. Please, don't waste your money." "Izuku," Hisashi hesitates, clearly torn. "It's definitely not a waste. You only have a backpack worth of clothes. It's no big deal, I promise. We want to buy you some clothes. You should be comfortable. We want you to be comfortable." "Problem child," Shota sighs, when Izuku bites hard enough at his bottom lip that the skin burns in threat of splitting open. "We're supposed to be taking care of you. What do you think your social worker is going to say when she comes around for that home visit and sees that you own only 2 pairs of your own non-school-related clothes?" A breath of anxious air rushes out of his lungs, and he stutters through a shaky inhale at the thought. She was a nice enough lady, but her rules and requests held no room for error or complaint. There isn't a doubt in his mind that she won't hesitate to tear away from his teachers if she deems them unfit. He doesn't even think that any pleading on his part would make a difference. Izuku wants to stay with his teachers. They were familiar and kind, and honestly, it was the most rational place for Izuku to be. His teacher gives him a considering look before it slowly melts into an out-of-place, soft expression, stepping close and carefully tucking Izuku into his side. It's the first time that his homeroom teacher had ever really embraced him in any way. He'd gotten light touches and head pats over the last couple days of being under his teacher's guardianship, but this was different. Izuku melts into the half-embrace before he even registers there's an arm around him. It's different than hugging All Might. It's even different when Hazashi had slung an arm around Izuku's shoulder earlier. He's not sure why it's different, but it is. I know this is a lot, kid. I get it. Shota's voice is barely a whisper, arching forward just a little to be closer to Izuku's level without pulling away. His voice comes out so soft that Izuku's sure that only he can hear it. He squeezes his eyes shut, forcing his teeth to release his lip when Shota gives him a light squeeze. But trust me when I say that we want to do this. We want you to have clothes, and your own bedding and possessions. You're staying with us, hopefully, for a long time. We want you to be content and happy, and taken care of. We want to take care of you. It's so much, Izuku whispers, finally blinking his eyes open. I'm sorry, I just can't. No, don't be sorry. Shota shakes his head. We're almost done, I promise. Pick out 2 pairs of pajamas, 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, and a sweatshirt. Then we're done. Intent to let Izuku pick his new clothes on his own, the dark-haired man lets the teen out of his hold, but doesn't move away yet. Izuku doesn't make any move to step away either, just worries his bottom lip between his teeth again. He wishes Oboro hadn't opted to stay home with Izuku's laptop playing an old hero movie that he'd found on a streaming site at the ghost's request. Shopping is boring when I can't touch anything, the ghost had groaned in an attempt to guilt Izuku into letting him borrow his laptop. And you never talk to me when there's other people around, especially Sho and Zashi. And the guilt trip had worked. He'd lingered for probably far too long in the guest room, making sure Oboro was content, his laptop's volume loud, but just low enough that no one would actually hear it outside of the room. He'd left a giddy ghost on his bed with a beginning credit to a movie that Izuku had never even heard of, playing. He'd shut the door quickly after himself, letting out a silent breath of relief when the hallway remained silent despite the movie playing. He didn't want to have to explain why he was letting a film play while he wasn't even in the room, not even home. That's so much, Izuku breathes out again, shooting his teacher a betrayed glance. That's hardly enough, Hazashi counters, gaze shooting to Izuku like he wants to wrap the teen up in a blanket and buy the whole damn clothing department for him. That's a logical compromise, Shota huffs out, as if he'd predicted both of their reactions. Hazashi, leave the kid alone, and problem child. Hazashi wanted to buy you a full new wardrobe, so for the love of God, take the win. Shota's hands are tucked in his pockets, stands slack as if he's not acting as a mediator. He's not annoyed per se, but Izuku thinks his patience is starting to run thin. Hazashi spins to glare softly at his husband, mouth opening to spurn the decision, eyebrows furrowed in some form of discontentment. Shota beat him to it, though, turning sharply to the side. I love you, but think about it from his point of view, huh? I know you just want to spoil him rotten, but that's not what he wants, and as much as I hate to veto you, I am the official guardian, Zashi. Shota's gaze locks onto Hazashi, his lips are pursed in understanding. And you, he shoots Izuku a pointed look, just a second after Hazashi's shoulders start to slump. It's our money, and we get to choose how we want to spend it, and it's on you, so pick what you want, or we're picking it out for you, and then I really won't be able to stop him. That feels like a threat. Not a serious one, of course. They're talking about clothes and spending money. Frankly, most people would be happy in Izuku's position, so it really isn't a threat, but he really doesn't want to walk out of here with a full new wardrobe. That's far too much. The teen shoots one last pitiful look at his homeroom teacher, but he stays strong, prompting Izuku on with nothing but a nod of his head in the direction of the racks of clothes. So the teen blinks with a sigh, trying to ignore the swirling guilt that he's somehow using their kindness and taking advantage of them, even though they literally aren't letting him weasel his way out of it, and he browses the clothing department. He does as asked. He picks out the required amount of clothes. He is conscious of prices, but Everything is roughly the same amount when it counts. So, finally, he makes his way back to the cart, where the two adults are talking in hushed voices, Shota leaning against the cart on the handle while Hisashi stands at the other end with a defeated look, and his arms loosely are crossed over his chest. It's not tense, just sullen. "Sorry, listener," Hisashi offers gently when Izuku comes back. His arms drop to his sides, almost like he'd suddenly deflated. "I was being overbearing, huh? I just hate that you're in this position, so, and your landlord hadn't gotten back to me yet about your stuff, and I hate that you don't have much, and—" "It's okay," Izuku smiles, nudging his shoulder against the pro's arm, and it's a bold gesture before he can second-guess himself. He ducks his head, completely missing the surprised adoration on the hero's face. Izuku means the words this time, not like he'd just thought about saying the same thing to All Might earlier. "I just don't want you wasting so much money on me." "That's never a waste, listener," Hisashi promises, catching the teen in a hug that Izuku can't help but return, pushing closer. "Never." "He's right," Shota huffs, eyeing Izuku's clothing selection. He seems satisfied with the clothes, bowing his head lightly in a nod before speaking. "And now, as promised, we're done. Let's go. I'm tired of being here, and I'm hungry." They're in the checkout lane, surprisingly quickly. His homeroom teacher must be in a hurry to leave. The three of them are putting items on the conveyor belt to be scanned, but Izuku can't help but watch the price go up as everything is scanned through. He feels sick. He already sees a credit card in Shota's hand, waiting to be used. Hisashi is still unloading the cart, but Izuku's overcome with dread to help. "I can help pay," Izuku blurts quietly, desperately, and though it doesn't make this feel right in the slightest, all this money being spent on him, it'll definitely clear his conscience a little. "Sure." Shota nods easily without a glance in Izuku's direction. "How much you got?" "What? Sho?" Hisashi gasps, appalled. "No, he will not—" "Around 5,000 yen," Izuku offers slowly, pulling the bills out of his pocket and holding them out to Shota, who takes them without looking over at Hisashi's gawking face. It's really not much, considering how high the number is climbing, but it's most of his money that he'd saved. There's still a couple hundred yen tucked away in his school bag for emergencies, but that had been the bulk of it. It's a weight off his chest to contribute, though, even if it causes Hisashi's face to twist in disbelief. "He doesn't need to—" "Hisashi." Shota's voice comes out, low yet soft, almost like a warning. Izuku almost feels a little bad about how the blonde-haired man physically wilts in defeat at Shota's tone, pouting as if he seems to accept the exchange without further protest, even if he looks like he wants to. Still, Shota continues softly, and he tucks the money into his own pocket. "It's okay." "Yeah," the blonde man frowns, gaze flitting over to Izuku. He's not sure what the hero sees in his expression, but whatever it is makes Hisashi's expression soften. "Okay." Thankfully, they don't do much shopping other than eating, but that's not where the hecticness ends. Thursday has Izuku staying after school with Shota for a visit to Recovery Girl. He'd honestly been dreading this part, and he'd known it was coming. Still, it was one of the requirements a social worker had given, and honestly, he's glad this physical is happening with Recovery Girl instead of some random pediatrician somewhere. He follows instructions as prompted, strips off his shirt for her to assess his old injuries. She asks about his history as she checks his vitals. He's weighed and measured, and he feels like he's 4 years old again. She does a heart exam, a lung exam, a head and neck exam. She does simple neurological tests and does a quick extremities exam, looking at his extra jointed pinky toes and checking his wisdom teeth and appendix, the parts of him that scream quirkless. It's a good thing that Recovery Girl is already in the loop of One for All and knows that he was quirkless, or this could have been a very awkward examination. Recovery Girl explains everything she does, and it helps to put him at ease. Before he really knows it, Shota's back in the room with them, slumped patiently in the chair beside where Izuku is sitting. The teen is perched on the edge of one of the beds, and had been for the majority of the exam. The infirmary didn't have an actual exam table, so it was the best she could do. "Underweight," Recovery Girl tuts out, without Aizawa-sensei even asking. "He's malnourished. 3 meals a day, young man. Aizawa, you and Yamada need to make sure he's eating balanced meals. His quirk burns through calories incredibly fast. You need some meat on your bones, with those muscles, you hear?" Izuku nods meekly. Shota looks thoughtful where he's sitting, but he doesn't say anything, just keeps his focus on Recovery Girl. "And the poor thing's scarred beyond belief. You're lucky that I know you're in the hero course as a student who regularly breaks his bones, or I'd need to report these healed wounds on suspicion of abuse. You need to get a handle on your quirk, dearie. Your body won't be able to handle these injuries recurring forever. At some point my quirk won't help anymore, and you'll be left with permanent damage. Izuku is yet to put his shirt back on, so when his teacher's gaze flicks back to see him for himself, all Izuku can do is tuck in on himself. The wounds range from small, old scrapes that scarred over to big, palm-sized burns and other marks. A lot of his wounds are from his newfound quirk, but a lot of them are from his childhood, growing up with Kachan and his gang of bullies. We're working on that, Shota tells her easily, shooting Izuku a glance. Anything else? Everything else looked fairly normal, the woman huffs out softly. His temperature's a little below average, which isn't really a cause for concern. It might affect his circulation, though, so let me know if you start experiencing any weakness in your muscles, regular pins and needles sensations on your skin, numbness, or chest pains. And you, she turns to his teacher, after he gives another slow, understanding nod, you and Yamada watch for pale complexion on him, or, heaven forbid, a blue tint to his skin. You contact me right away, got it? Yes, ma'am. Shota ducks his head in a respectful nod. We'll keep an eye on that. I'm just regularly cold, Izuku tells her softly. I always have been. He thinks it has to do with the ghosts and how cold they are. He knows he always gets colder when Obero's around, and it's always freezing when he makes contact with the ghost, or he stands too close. Still, the nurse shakes her head. Be mindful of it, both of you. She's quiet for a second, leaning back in her rolled chair. Any questions for me? Actually, Shota speaks out before Izuku can shake his head and answer. His eyes shoot towards his teacher, but the man is looking at the nurse. She prompts him on with an acknowledging hum. I was going to bring this up to his mother before shit hit the fan, but is it possible the kid could have some sort of developmental disability, ADHD maybe? Izuku's sure his jaw drops open at that, blinking a few times at his teacher. A disability? A disability they'd noticed? Why? What have you noticed? Lack of attention, the man huffs blandly, and Izuku freezes. He gets carried away with his thoughts in class, and he'll space out for a good number of minutes before coming back. Gets lost in his own tangents. He mutters to himself sometimes, too. Yamada and I have both noticed it. There's nothing wrong with it, so please, Midoriya, don't give me that look. You're fine. We were just curious if there was something we could be doing to help with his focus. Izuku hadn't even realized that his expression had been dropping into something of... He's not even sure. He makes sure to press his mouth into a straight line and stare ahead, though. They thought that he had a learning disability, or how had his teacher put it? A developmental one. And they were going to tell his mom about it, too. He's not sure what to think about that. He supposes he's glad that they're looking out for him, that they're making excuses for him. He does space out a lot, but at the same time he's a little... embarrassed? He'd been caught many times, apparently, if it was a concern at this point. It could be, the nurse hums out thoughtfully. Among other diagnoses, we can set up additional testing, but that's for another day. He's been through enough today. Take the poor thing home for the night. He's got a big day tomorrow, and hopefully I won't be seeing him. I'll try not to get hurt at the festival, Izuku finds himself saying, a tiny smile lifting to his face. No promises, though. He sounds like you. The nurse huffs a laugh, slapping Shota on the knee. The man blinks with a frown, glancing over the teen. I remember you saying the exact same thing to me years ago. No promises, though. If I remember correctly, it was only a couple days later that you came in with that dislocated shoulder, caused by that silly capture scarf thing that you were so enthralled by. I mastered that scarf, the man scoffs, though his cheeks have darkened with color. Izuku nods hurried in agreement, because Shota with a scarf was frickin' cool. He was amazing when it came to using the capture weapon. Yes, of course, dear, the woman huffs, patting his knee, like you would a child who'd been discouraged. Now, you have, sure, but back then, I swear I saw you every week. Poor Yamada had to drag you in here when you'd fall from the ceiling, or when you broke your bones, and, of course, there was more than just one dislocation. She gives a laugh like she's remembering something fond instead of a student making weekly nurse visits for seemingly bad injuries. She cracks a smile, cocking her head in Izuku's direction, softly patting his knee as well. Don't take after him, dearie. Izuku looks over at his teacher, who's steadily gotten more and more flushed as the nurse talked on. She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she didn't even care, that she was embarrassing him. Recovery Girl had never reminded him more of a grandmother teasing her grandchildren than in that moment. The woman lets out another laugh, eyes twinkling as she looks at Izuku. His gaze goes a little hard, knowing that, as she continues, I know I'll be seeing a lot more of you, so make promises that you can actually keep. You children, you're all the reason I'm going gray, I'll tell you. You are a problem, child, Shota huffs under his breath, knee nudging Izuku's own. As were you, Recovery Girl scoffs, shaking her head teasingly. You still are, 15 whole years later. 12 years since you graduated, and you're still sticking around, still relying on my quirk, you and Yamada both. All right, Shota clears his throat awkwardly, the pink flush crawling up his cheeks again. Put your shirt on, Midoriya. Let's go. Recovery girl. We'll be in touch. Yes, yes, the woman waves them off, turning to her desk. Izuku listens as he pulls on his button-up and starts doing up the buttons. Good luck tomorrow, dearie. Do try to be careful. I will, the teen bows gratefully. Thank you for your help. Any time, child, she offers fondly. Come on, Midoriya, Shota calls, the teen's blazer and tie draped his arm, before she starts telling more stories. I do have a bunch, the woman teases, just as Shota ushers him out the door. Goodbye, boys. Take care. It's that evening, when he and Shota get home, that the news of Izuku's landlord finally getting in touch with Hisashi comes to light. True to Oberon's word, the boxes of Izuku's belongings, clothes, All Might merch, trinkets, and knickknacks were all stored away for him to come get. According to Hisashi, his landlord had seemed relieved that Izuku was all right, and he didn't mind holding on to the boxes until Sunday, the earliest day all three of them would have to stop by and collect them. He wished you good luck in the festival, Hisashi had told him, tone bordering on cooing. It was very cute. He said his daughter would be rooting for you from home. That's kind, Shota had mumbled from his spot on the couch where Nemo was once again curled up in his lap, his fingers stroked along her head. Isn't it? Hisashi grinned. We'll be rooting for you, too. Unbiasedly, Shota added gruffly. We like you, problem child, but your combatants are literally the rest of my students. I'll be biased. No, you won't, Shota huffed. They're your students, too. Unbiased English teacher. Fine, fine, the blonde sighs, scratching at his scalp before dragging his finger back through the golden locks. I'll be unbiased, but a little biased because this one's mine. You should be biased, too, at least a little bit. He's yours as well. Oboro cocked his head in Izuku's direction, having watched the whole exchange. He'll definitely be completely biased towards you. It's a good thing that he's just an announcer, not a judge, huh? Izuku can't help but snort a laugh, taking a sip of his tea to hide his pleased smile. He gives a light nod to his tea as the two pros bicker over how wrong it is to be biased. Just a bit biased. That's still biased. Back and forth, constantly. The next morning, Izuku wakes up to a ghost that's standing on his chest. Well, technically he's in his chest, and he's jumping. The springs in the mattress don't move at all, under the ghost's non-existent weight, but Izuku feels like his heart is going to freeze in his chest. Ugh, he slurs out with a shiver. I thought you weren't going to wake me like this. It's Sports Festival Day, the ghost blurts out like a child on Christmas morning. He's too giddy. Izuku really needs to figure out a way for the ghost to sleep so that he can return the favor, and wake him up by swatting a hand through him. Get up, get up! Sashi made miso soup, rice, grilled salmon, and eggs for breakfast. Come on, come on. You gotta go eat so that you'll be ready to kick some serious ass today. Izuku sits up, frowning at the stuffed cat that's clutched in his arms, and the cat at his side, watching the ghost apprehensively. Good morning, fish, the teen huffs, petting the old cat's ears back. He gets a good morning before me. He didn't jump on my chest, Izuku snorts out, finally shoving the covers off, careful not to disturb the cat. The teen glances at the theatrically pouting ghost. Good morning, Oboro, he huffs out sarcastically. You're in a good mood. Sure am, the ghost cheers. I'm going to watch you win the sports festival today. Oh, yeah? Oh, yeah. The grin is wide, even wider than his usual squinty eyes grin. This time, he smiles so big that his eyes squeeze shut. I know you'll do great. Wipe the floor with your peers. You're sounding biased, Izuku teased as he finally pushed himself out of bed, his new pajamas wrinkled from sleep. I'm 100% biased. Izuku's nose wrinkles with a wicked smile. I don't have obligations like your teachers do. You really think it'll go well? I know so. Well then, let the games begin. This concludes Chapter 14. Chapter 15 will be up next, and as always, I hope you guys are still enjoying this, and thank you so much for listening.